Hi everyone, my name is Louise. I'm a part of the sales and distribution team for Coral Expeditions, and I'm coming to you live from our head office in Cairns today. I will let you know we are recording today's webinar, and as a recording will be sent around to everyone that's registered, so you can share this with your friends and your family and whoever else you want to share it with. I'm also joined by one of our lovely guest lecturers who joins our guests on board, Quinton Chester. So Quinton lives on Kangaroo Island and is our South Australia expert. So he'll run through some of the itinerary a little bit later in the webinar for us. I would also just like to thank everyone for taking the time to join our Southern Coastline webinar today. We will have an opportunity for questions at the end. So today's focus is taking you on a journey with Coral Expeditions, and that's to give you an insight of how to explore the Southern Australian natural wilderness, the remote islands and the sea cliffs the Australian way. So for those of you that are new to Coral Expeditions, we have been operating now for 40 years, and it's always with a single purpose, and that's to take small groups of like-minded explorers to remote places, and that's with our warm Australian hospitality. So let's get into it. So we have 4 itineraries in our Southern Coastline series, and all of them are on board our Coral Adventurer, this beautiful ship you can see in the image here. So we got her in 2019. She can fit up to 120 passengers, so really low numbers, so 60 staterooms. There are 2 really large 55 square metre suites on board, and then a range of lovely indoor and outdoor dining and seating areas to enjoy the views. She also has explorer deck balconies, so you've got a beautiful balcony view that wraps around. We've got our promenade deck, which has our picture windows, and our coral deck, which is our porthole windows. She has the wraparound promenade deck, so you do have the panoramic views. You can go for a full walk around the ship, and you'll never miss the view on that one. She's got beautiful seating areas, so there's always somewhere nice to go and sit. On board of our Coral Adventurer, we have our explorers. We like to call these our safari jeeps of the sea. So they come on the back of our ships. You'll see a hydraulic platform. They get raised up into the back deck. Our guests walk on, as you can see in that top right picture, across the platform. They sit down. They do sit our ship's capacity. So on our adventure, we've got 2 of these explorers. They walk across a little ramp. They sit down onto chairs that have nice, comfortable backs as well. It gets lowered down on the hydraulic platform, and it's off in under 5 minutes. It's really amazing. Once you're off, you have clears that come down the side. So if you do run into some rain or some wind in South Australia, then we can put the clears down and you'll still have a perfect view, panoramic view out of the Explorer. There's also a toilet on board for your remote convenience. There's an audio system for clear commentary along the way. There's the comfortable seats, and then there's the roof as well to protect you from the sun. So these are really amazing, and they are a really great tool that we use to do all of our shore excursions. We do also have our Zodiacs that we take on all of our trips, but we do spend majority of the time in our Explorers. We just use the Zodiacs to get that little bit closer to nature and just as another exciting adventure to add on to the Explorer rides. So our expedition team, they always provide local expertise. They all have a really strong understanding of the unique landscapes, the flora and fauna, and all the Indigenous cultures of the regions that we're visiting. Our passionate expedition leaders on board, they take our guests on every excursion. We don't hand over to land-based tour companies. We do focus more time ashore with the 2 shore excursions daily where possible. So these shore excursions generally have 2 options. It may vary from an easy coastal flat beach walk to a more challenging hike on uneven ground to a viewing point or a point of interest, but there will always be something for everyone. The night before, usually at sunset drinks, our expedition leaders will give you a briefing about the excursions that are coming the next day. After that, if you are unsure which excursion you should pick or which one's best for you, just to have a chat with them after the briefing, and they'll be able to point you in the right direction. But yes, always something for everyone. So Coral Expeditions was actually one of the first cruise operators to employ interpretive guides on our cruise, and that is a tradition that we still continue today. So each trip includes a mix of our full-time guest lecturers who join the expedition team and our special guest lecturers who are chosen for their specific local knowledge. They really help immerse our guests in the unique wildlife, in the cultures, the flora and fauna and history of the environments that we're visiting, and I think that's a really big part of what expedition cruising is all about. So speaking of our guest lecturers, I do have Quinton online with me. So Quinton actually lives on Kangaroo Island. So he's a South Australia expert. And he loves sharing South Australia's spectacular coastlines with our guests. So I will hand over to you now, Quinton.
Thanks very much, Louise, and great to be with you and everyone on the webinar. And yeah, it's quite exciting to see these photographs. It's been a few months since we've done a trip down here, and it's quite fun to see the images of that part of the world again. Even though I do live on Kangaroo Island, I don't get to see these cliffs in the photo there very often. So the big itineraries we do in the south, the longer ones include this journey either from Adelaide or from Melbourne across the Bight, or from Fremantle across the Bight. And it's a great experience. It picks up on a lot of what makes Southern Australia and the Southern Ocean very special. It's very dramatic coastline. Some of the biggest sea cliffs in Southern Hemisphere are in this stretch of coast. And the power of the ocean's very much on show with the dramatic cliffs and some of the rocky islands that we visit. There's a lot of interesting facets to it, and this part of the world isn't that well known compared to perhaps some of the islands in Queensland or even Tasmania. But I believe it's got a lot to offer all sorts of people, both from the sheer spectacle of it, the physical landscape, but also the wildlife, the vegetation, and cultural history as well. And of course, in this part of the world, wonderful seafood and wine, as you would expect from all these wonderful districts that provide us those sources of produce. So yeah, it's a real package of things. And amongst that is the southwest of WA, which is a real highlight for those people crossing the Bight. So we venture into the kind of mix of things there, the natural world, but also the fantastic wineries that are associated with Margaret River, including the very historic Lewin Estate Winery, which is a marvellous place, both for obviously the wines, but is a real window onto the history of winemaking in this part of the world. And we often do get a chance to visit the winery and sample some of the wines and hear the story. So it's a very strong cultural story about wine and how this region has been pioneered over the last 40 or 50 years and is certainly one of the leading wine regions of this in Australia. And we also visit some of the coastal towns and settlements, including Busselton with its wonderful jetty, which goes right out into Naturalist Bay. Real highlight of our trip is touching base with all these different aspects of the southwest, be it on the north side of WA, the north side of that peninsula area, or further down on the south coast. And as we get further to the west and south, we come into contact with some of the rockier shorelines, wonderful granite coastline here, and very much like South Australia, where we've got this mix of granite shores and also limestone formations nearby, which provide an interesting contrast. And there's a great story about the geology, which we talk about. And because you've got a rocky coastline and it's a place that ships have to navigate, we also see some fantastic lighthouses, including some of the lighthouses like Cape Naturalist up there on the top of the Cape to Cape Walk, and then also further down south to the Cape Lewin Lighthouse, one of the great lighthouses of Australia. And these are wonderful kind of insights, again, into obviously the nature of the coast and the need to protect ships as they navigate these shores, but also into the history of lighthouses in southern Australia, which is a really big part of the story on all of our trips down south, including in Tasmania. And a lot of our guest lecturers are very involved with lighthouses, with the history and heritage of those structures, and can share some great stories. The whole feature of our journey as a nation is securing the coast with the lighthouses. As well as that side of things, we also see some of the natural wonders of the southwest of WA, the limestone formations, these big limestone layers over the top of some of the older granites, a wonderful cave formation, some of the best caves in Australia in the southwest of WA. And most of our itineraries down there, we take the opportunity to go ashore and show you some of that highlights. And there's again, with all caves, there's always a little bit of local storytelling and mythology about the caves. And it's a nice contrast. You know, we've been out in the wild, open air on the ship and on the coastline, and then to come into the cave it's just a nice contrast to some of those more outdoor experiences. And then the forests of WA in the southwest are very famous, the karri trees. It is very spectacular. And that's part of our journey as we come towards the caves. We're moving through the forest and you get a chance to experience that side of the natural world there. And Cape Leeuwin, where the two oceans meet, where the Indian Ocean and the Southern Ocean meet, is a genuine highlight on these trips. It can be very wild there, as you might expect, a very exposed headland, but has a lot of history. And if possible, we do get to the lighthouse there. And for those who feel like climbing a couple of hundred steps, you can get to the top of the tower. So fingers crossed we get that opportunity. Hamelin Bay is another feature of the coast, not far from Cape Leeuwin, in fact, and that faces out towards the northwest and is a wonderful enclosed bay with these fantastic stingrays, which are legendary. They're very kind of placid, docile animals. You can be sort of in the water and they'll come swimming around us. It's a real feature of this bay. And that's just a little example of one of the things that we do in that part of the world. But it's all part of this spectacular coastline that runs from Cape Leeuwin up to Cape Naturalist. And on the course of our journey there on the ship, you get to see that coastline from the vantage point of a ship, and some wonderful surf beaches, and all of the highlights that make the Southwest such a special place. We don't normally have to hitchhike our way out of Hamelin Bay, but they were obviously some of the group having a bit of fun there after doing a bit of a walk. And as we come further to the east, we come around from Cape Leeuwin, we cross into the region around Albany, and that's a really spectacular place, a very famous port in the King George Sound there, and also a lot of history associated with aspects of whaling and maritime history. There's the wonderful First World War Museum in Albany as well. So this is a major highlight of the trip from a cultural and natural history point of view. And it's a very sheltered anchorage that we have there. So it gives us a chance just to recharge our batteries a bit, as it were. And we also visit along our way further to the east again. We head out towards Esperance and we visit Woody Island, which is out in the archipelago of the Resurge, one of the great archipelagos in Australia. Again, a part of the country that very few people get to see. And you might see on the bottom photo there a shot of the Coral Adventurer out in the bay, and we bring our explorers into the jetty there, and we do some wonderful walks on Woody Island. It's been privately managed for many, many decades now, so there's an interesting sort of family history with the island. Lots of bird life there, lovely natural vegetation. There is a chance to swim there as well, and perhaps have a good look around in the water. But it's part of this very extensive archipelago of granite formation islands. And it's a real highlight for me. I went there back in the early 1990s for the first time as part of a book I was writing. And to go back there, I still get a buzz every time we go into the archipelago of the Resurge, because it is such a special place and very hard to see otherwise. We're one of the few companies that go into that part of Australia. Near there also is a mainland destination which is quite famous, Lucky Bay, with these very strong granite headlands and peaks. These beautiful beaches. Lucky Bay is a very famous beach, but also some of the neighbouring beaches are very spectacular. There's an opportunity there to do some walks on that beautiful white sand. They're very firm beaches to walk on. So it's quite straightforward for people who may be not used to walking on soft sand. These are very good beaches for a bit of a stroll. And we also take people, if they wish, on slightly harder walks up into some of the more undulating country for views over some of the the headlands looking towards Cape Legrand and some of the granite formations there. So yes, it's a very special place, and Lucky Bay was named that by Matthew Flinders as part of his circumnavigation of Australia. He felt that they were very lucky to get a secure anchorage there. They had no idea of where they were heading as they came in, and they were very fortunate that the bay offered them safe refuge for a couple of nights. So it's got a bit of maritime history to it as well. And as we come much further east, there's a sea day or two as we cross the Great Australian Bight. And for a lot of people, those days as we're in the open sea is a real highlight. It's a journey that very few people make these days, apart from on voyages like this. And it can be quite a challenging stretch of water, but it's also an opportunity to see a lot of seabirds, pelagic birds. We do encounter dolphins from time to time out in the Bight. So it is a lovely experience for a lot of people. And as we come further to the east again, we're coming to South Australian waters. And our first destination normally as we're coming from west to east is Flinders Island, which is one of the largest islands in South Australia, the second largest island off the coast apart from Kangaroo Island. And here we meet up with a wonderful family, the Woolford family, and there's Jonas there serving up some abalone, which is part of their lifestyle there is that they dive for abalone. That's their business, one of their operations. And we get to hear the incredible story that they have as two brothers who run this small boat diving for abalone in the season. And we taste the freshest abalone you can ever find, really, when we're with them. And they're very engaging, interesting men, and their family history, their father, Peter, pioneered a lot of things on the island. And they're now looking at rehabilitating the island. It was grazed by sheep over many decades, but the boys are gradually destocking the island and looking to restore it to more of natural values, revegetating it, and hopefully introducing some animals back to the island over time. So there's a real strong conservation kind of story there, as well as the chance to have a bit of a yarn with the boys there and taste the wonderful abalone. And as we go further to the east again, we get back to the mainland coast of Eyre Peninsula and visit Coffin Bay, which is almost world famous now for its oysters. And we have a wonderful experience out in amongst the oyster leases, the chance to sample the oysters and have a sip or two or something, but also to hear the story of the Coffin Bay oysters. And they're very proud of their environment there, which delivers this wonderful product. It's one of the cleanest, most protected marine environments in Australia, and the oysters are exceptional. And even if you're not interested in oysters, it's a great story to have. There's often something else to sample. If you're not keen on oysters, you can have something else. But it's well worthwhile as part of the whole cultural history of that part of South Australia where seafood and oysters have been a multi-generational industry that's exported, right around the country and beyond. So yeah, we're starting to get into the real tastes and sensations of South Australia. All right, coming to the other side of Eyre Peninsula, we get on towards the southeastern corner of Eyre Peninsula, and we come around into Boston Bay eventually, where Port Lincoln is based. And we spend a lot of our time in Lincoln National Park when we're there, and we get a chance to look at some of the European history and the Indigenous history there at Cape Donington. We climb up to this wonderful obelisk on top of Stamford Hill near Cape Donington, which commemorates Flinders' expedition of 1802. And that's a short but steep climb. And for those who are keen to do a bit of exercise, it's a great opportunity to get close to this piece of history, but also to enjoy spectacular 360 views right across Port Lincoln up towards the Joseph Banks group of islands, much further to the north, and way out across into towards Thistle Island and some of the islands offshore. And at Cape Donington, we also visit a small island where we have a sighting of Australian sea lions. So that's in the bottom right picture there. And then ultimately, when we do go to Kangaroo Island at Seal Bay, we have a really special opportunity to learn and experience the habitat of sea lions. So these are one of our only two indigenous marine mammals in Australia. The small snubfin dolphin up in the top of the country is the other indigenous marine mammal. But Australian sea lions are a feature of South Australia and the Western Australian coast. They're very endearing animals. My wife and I, work at Seal Bay at different times, and we help guide people on the beach there as part of our trips with Coral. And we have a real special opportunity. This is the only place in the world where you can get to see the animals in this degree of comfort, as it were, and in this proximity. A lot of the seal lion colonies are like at Cape Donington. They're on rocky, quite inhospitable islands, but Seal Bay is a big sweep of 4 kilometres of beach where the sea lions come to breed. It's their home, and we highlight these animals, these sea lions, as being a real example of the strength and the vigour of the marine ecology in this part of Australia. It's a very rich environment to support not just obviously sea lions, but we also have long-nosed fur seals and Australian fur seals in this part of Australia. Plus, of course, we have whales that visit here, great white sharks. So there's a lot of these top predators which tell you that there's a lot of food in the ocean to the south of South Australia and WA, which drives that food chain, keeps the dynamics of the ecology really working. And a lot of fun to see these seals, the sea lions, up close. We often have encounters some of the younger sea lions, the pups and some of the juveniles, and they will come right up to us at times. We have to be quite careful about that, but we manage that situation with our experience there. But they're very endearing, very good-natured animals with a real good story to tell. So that's a big feature of our South Australian leg of the trip. So just turning from those trips that do cross the Bight from Fremantle to Adelaide, and also from Melbourne back to Fremantle, within South Australia itself, we have a dedicated itinerary which goes from Adelaide to Adelaide and weaves its way around a lot of those places we've already been talking about, plus a lot of other highlights in South Australia. And one of the great features of South Australia is its peninsulas and its islands. So there's over 300 islands off South Australia. And these are places that very few people get to see, apart from on these coral trips. A lot of them are way offshore. Some of the islands are well known, like obviously Kangaroo Island, but there are many more which are uninhabited, very wild, very spectacular. We don't always get a chance to land on those islands because of the difficulties of doing that. But with the ship, we have the opportunity of coming quite close to quite a few of them safely, and we get a chance to see these big soaring sea cliffs, some of them up to 300 metres in height. And that's something you can't do any other way, really. Certainly on water, it's a great way to experience the spectacle of that coast. And again, associated with that coastline is a range of lighthouses. We often visit Cape Willoughby Lighthouse on the eastern end of Kangaroo Island, which is where we live, very close to the lighthouse. And we have a great chance there to show you the highlights. And then going back to Seal Bay, as well as the sea lions, we do also see kangaroos, wallabies, sometimes goannas and echidnas on our time on Kangaroo Island. So it is a real wildlife feature for this itinerary. And as I mentioned, the sea lions at Seal Bay. We do see them throughout the journey in different places. We see them in WA occasionally in small numbers, but at Seal Bay, there's about 800 sea lions that call that bay home. So we're guaranteed to see those animals there. And again, because we're on foot at this point, we have an opportunity to see the interactions, the social kind of life that the sea lions have. And as you can see from the top left image, occasionally the sea lions become a bit curious about us. We tend to stand very quietly and let them have a look if they want to, or come up to us if they want to. Usually they have a quick look and then they move on. They're not really, we've never had any incidents with these animals, so it's quite safe, and we as guides will manage that situation very carefully. But wildlife is a big feature of these trips, and Kangaroo Island is very much a home to kangaroos and wallabies, Tamar wallabies. So you're pretty much guaranteed to see some of that wildlife during your itineraries here. And even around the lighthouse at Cape Willoughby, you see quite a few kangaroos. York Peninsula, I mentioned a lot about Eyre Peninsula, but as part of our trips, we do also visit parts of York Peninsula. It's got some fantastic islands off the southern tip of York Peninsula, and we often go ashore near Royston Head here at Dolphin Beach. Beautiful sandy beach. As you can see, the watercolour is spectacular. For those who are feeling like a bit of a swim, that's certainly an option there. But we do some coastal walks which take you out onto the headlands, and again the chance to stretch your legs, get a bit of exercise, but also enjoy the really spectacular views of the coast, but also the islands that just stand offshore the coast. And those islands are often places where seals will be congregated, and also other birds, some interesting bird life that nest on some of these offshore islands. So there's a real sense of putting together a package of experiences on these trips in South Australia, where we visit a whole range of different habitats, we see wildlife, and we get to see parts of the state that are often quite hard to access. And that's one of the great joys of being on a ship like the Coral Adventurer, which is very comfortable on board. It's a very safe ship in terms of how it deals with these kind of waters. We've had the ship in some fairly challenging conditions, and it handles big seas very, very well. A lot of people are quite surprised at how well the ship copes with that. So it's a great itinerary. As with all things in the Southern Ocean and in Tasmania too, we have a lot of interesting weather. It can change very quickly, but with so many islands and peninsulas to play with, if the weather looks like it's turning a bit against certain locations, we can go to other sites, mix the itinerary up a little bit to find somewhere where there's a little bit more shelter and a different opportunity to stay out of trouble. So it's a good experience from that point of view. And then also around Eyre Peninsula, we do get a little bit closer to Port Lincoln on Boston Island. Again, a bit like Flinders Island here, a family have the sort of ownership and custody of the island. They manage it very well. They run a few sheep there, but essentially it's a wonderful natural habitat with good vegetation, lots of bird life. We often see goannas here, and certainly kangaroos, and plenty of bird life, as I mentioned. And even though it's just a short distance from the main township of Port Lincoln, it is quite a special world. It's quite eerie, really. You can just almost see the suburbs across the bay, but the island itself is like a little paradise, perched in the middle of Boston Bay there. And the Davis family look after us very well there. The walks are very straightforward. There's not too many challenging walks, but you can stretch your legs out and enjoy some of the highlights on the island. So yeah, it's a wonderful place. A couple of the other places we visit, we mentioned Lincoln National Park earlier. There's some fantastic walks there. You can see one of the groups there heading up towards Stamford Hill. A lot of the walks are on pretty well established pathways, so it's pretty straightforward walking. Some of the walks do take more difficult terrain, but you have a choice of those on this trip. And on Revesby Island, which is up in the Joseph Banks group, that's one of my favourite places on this whole itinerary. Not a particularly big island in terms of soaring cliffs and dramatic coastline. It's very subdued, but it's a wonderful story of how settlers used to live and farm the island, and then in more recent times it's become a really important place for conservation, with some of the most endangered mammals we have now using Revesby Island as their habitat. And we talk about those animals, obviously. Sometimes, if we're lucky, you might get to see them, but a lot of Australian small mammals, they're quite nocturnal. But we'll certainly be in and around their habitat, and we might spot a few of these smaller mammals And Revesby's got wonderful walks on it. So we do quite a few longer walks on Revesby, beautiful beachcombing walks, including up to the top of the island and down the eastern coast of the island. It's just a really nice place, and it's quite remote. Very few people go there. It's quite a distance from the mainland, and for a lot of people, there's over 20 islands in the Joseph Banks group of islands, and this is one of the larger ones. So it's a real window on another whole set of island habitats that we have in South Australia. And, you know, there are things here, including birds of prey. We have sea eagles and brown falcons that live out here. Ospreys are out here. And then, as I say, lots of dolphins we see in the water. Not far from Revesby, there's some very good sea lion colonies as well. So it's a real mix of things in the water, things on the island, things in the air. So there's always something to keep us occupied and interested. All right, and the other itinerary we have is this new one, which is travelling from Adelaide to Melbourne, 8 nights, which picks up on some of the coastal highlights: Rode, Port Macdonald, Port Fairy, Port Campbell. Now, this is, as the photograph sort of gives the game away a bit, the bottom right there with the wonderful southern rock lobsters. This is a very special part of Australia for its seafood, and particularly for lobsters. And so this journey will take us into these historic ports and towns, very important fishing ports. And we have on board with this itinerary some special chefs. So the real focus here is the food and wine of these regions that makes this part of Australia so special. So we're still doing a little bit of adventurous sailing, and we're going ashore, visiting townships. We're doing some coastal walks, but the real feature is looking at how the food and wine story has evolved in this part of Australia. Obviously, Rode, Port Macdonald, very close to the Coonawarra region in South Australia. And as we come around into Port Fairy, very close by there's some very good food and wine growing districts there. But the seafood off that part of Australia is quite spectacular. And that all tells you a story about how vibrant and how rich the oceans are here. The Southern Ocean stretch of Australia is just one of the great fishing regions in the world. And in fact, Port Lincoln is the largest fishing port in the Southern Hemisphere in terms of the size of the fleet there. And, you know, whether it's prawns or King George whiting or beautiful snapper, lobsters, oysters, you know, the list goes on. There's almost anything you can imagine that's good to have on the plate from the sea you can get from this part of the world. So looking forward very much to this itinerary coming up a bit later in the year. It's a new one for us, and I think it's a great way to showcase both the coastline and the spectacle of that. Obviously, places like the 12 Apostles are very famous, Port Campbell's very famous, but also dig a little bit deeper into that incredible food and wine story. So really looking forward to that. All right. How are we going, Louise? Any questions?
Yeah, thanks so much, Quentin. That was great. If anyone has any questions, by all means, please pop them into the little, there's a Q&A box at the top or a little chat box. If you want to pop something into there, I can see Lorraine Cook has put a little comment in already. She said, when ready to take questions, is it necessary to wear water/reef shoes when getting on and off the Explorer boats, as there'll be a lot of walking? Do I assume we change it to walking shoes once on land? So once we are on board, lots of people do bring reef sandals or Tiva sandals or just their flip-flops. That's fine as well. But we do recommend that you bring some sort of shoe that you don't mind getting wet. Once we are off the Explorer from a wet landing, our guides aboard our expedition team, they do carry towels, so you can dry them off and pop them in your backpack and put your hiking shoes on or your sneakers. So yes, we definitely do recommend that you bring like your sandals, your Tiva sandals. Does anyone else have any questions? I can definitely speak for Quentin. I did the Fremantle to Adelaide across the Great Australian Bight trip last October, and it was amazing. We saw so many seals and dolphins. It was really a beautiful trip. And those 2 days at sea, crossing boulders was just amazing. So yeah, and the team on board, they really put on as much as they can as well. They did a bit of a fashion show and a bit of a cocktail making class. So that, yeah, really amazing.
Yeah, and it's sometimes interesting to have like the hospitality team, you know, get a chance to showcase some of their extra skills, as you say, with things like cocktail making and you know, wine tastings and things like that. It's a great, you know, it's a fun trip, you know, from all sorts of different directions, and those sea days can be really enjoyable for people because, you know, they can just relax on board, read a book, or join in some of the fun. We often having talks on board as well. So yeah, there's always something to keep you entertained.
All right, well, it doesn't look like there's any more questions, but if anyone does think of anything, feel free to reach out to our reservations team. Their contact details are on the screen. But thank you so much, Quentin, for joining us, and we'll chat soon.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.